Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, August 15th, 2018 day. I am your host, Nick Pitts, for the Millennial Roundtable of Point of View on this relaxation day. And I'm joined in studio today by First Liberty's finest, Chelsey Youman. Chelsey, how are you today?
I'm well. I'll make sure to tell everyone at the office.
Okay, deal.
That's my new designation.
I like it. It just came up with it. And Kirby has the day off, so it's really just you and I for right now.
So he is relaxing.
He's actually relaxing on National Relaxation Day.
Perfect.
And so it just obviously makes sense. But we're not going to relax, because we've got quite a show for these individuals today that are just so gluttons for punishment, willing to tune in for this with us today. And so we've got a crazy first hour. We're going to be talking about some local politics in particular. For our Minnesota audience, we'll be talking a little bit about the races that happened up there, specifically Keith Ellison, despite the allegations that were out, still managed to win the Democratic primary last night. We'll be talking a little bit about, specifically here in the next few minutes, about Pete Sessions and then Ted Cruz as well, here in Dallas and Texas in particular, just because they are both. Ted Cruz was here, and also Beto O'Rourke was in the area last night in the Dallas area. And this race is much closer than many people expected. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that. And then towards the end of the hour, we'll be talking more about Jack Phillips. He's back in the news, but now it seems as though the agenda continues to push against him, the unrelenting pursuit of being intolerantly tolerant, as another group has now decided that they're going to sue Mr. Phillips for the Masterpiece Cake Shop in order that he might be able to make them not a gay wedding cake anymore, but a transgender cake. And so they're going to be back in court here too soon. But that was just breaking earlier this morning. We'll talk a little bit more about that, especially since we have our First Amendment religious liberty guru here in studio in Chelsey Youman. But nevertheless, let's jump on into it, Chelsey. I am extremely fascinated by this race, specifically here in the Dallas area. Obviously, just because the implications are very personal, since this is going to be the individual that represents me. And so let's break it down a little bit. Let's take first the 32nd District, Congressional District of Pete Sessions. Pete Sessions has been in office for a little over 10 plus years. And so what Pete Sessions now finds himself in a race that's a little bit closer than what's been anticipated. There's an individual named Colin Allred. He's probably familiar. That's a familiar name to Tennessee Titans fans. He's a former football player, also a civil rights attorney, participated in the Clinton campaign, I believe. And so he's got some significant ties. But probably the most important news that's coming out just recently is polls have him within 2 percentage points, so within the margin of error in this 32nd district in Texas. And obviously, there's always been that talk, Chelsey, of the blue wave that might be coming, of Texas turning blue. And really, if the past was any indication, it just seems as though that's talk. It hasn't really been action. But now polls are continuing to show this race tightening up, which is just shocking to say the least.
It's definitely shocking for a homegrown Texan from North Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm from the DFW area, and so never did I think I would, see the day that the polling comes so close between a Democrat candidate and a Republican candidate in North Texas. But here we are. Pete Sessions is running. It is his 10th term.
Mm-hmm.
So he has been just a staple of the community and our representation both here in North Texas for most of my life, actually, the majority of my life. But, I actually don't put too much stock in these polls, and you might hear this trend again with Ted Cruz. Now, when it comes to polling specifically his district, I do think that that's something to look at that can't be overlooked. Pete Sessions is in a competitive campaign. He needs to be campaigning hard in the area. But he also, as I mentioned, is tried and true for our representation. He stands by our issues. If Republicans will get out and be as excited and motivated to vote and defend our state and keep it red, as Democrats are to try to turn it blue, then I think that he'll be just fine. Some of the commentary I've seen has really put a lot of weight in the fact that Hillary Clinton won the district narrowly during the presidential election. But at the time, Pete Sessions was also up for re-election. I know he didn't have as competitive. He didn't have a challenger at the time, but he very much still won his seat then. And I don't think, when I looked at Ballotpedia, I looked at kind of like the history of his campaigns over the last 10 years. He has typically had a challenger, and he's typically lambasted them. And so in the polls, and, voter turnout is a huge part of that. And so I would just encourage anyone, if you are in Pete Sessions' district, to get out and make sure you're voting, because yes, this is a competitive race, but we don't want to see North Texas go blue. I think there's been a ton of buzz around that lately, especially with mega corporations moving into the area and Collin County specifically. There's been a lot of buzz that, okay, it's finally time for Dallas County and Collin County. They're going to be blue now. I don't think that's going to necessarily be the case.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, just because there's been such an influx of individuals that are new to the area that have moved to the area. Census Bureau released some numbers that indicated upwards of 400 new people are moving into the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And many of them, I think the largest state that's kind of bringing in some of their individuals is California. And California is pretty traditionally blue. But what you have with Pete Sessions is, you have a stalwart figure. One, he's just been around for a long time, so he's known by the community. And then two, he's got some influence on Capitol Hill as well, which is usually one of those things that local constituencies really do value, because you have Pete Sessions, who's on the House Committee on Rules. And so that's a pretty sizable, pretty significant, he's the chair of that committee, which comes with longevity and tenure, just like you would expect of any organization that has, you would expect if they've been there for a long time, they've earned the right to be able to lead a particular component of that organization. And so the idea that this district could be flipped, I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating in this blue wave we're experiencing.
Yeah, I think to say it could be flipped is a little bit of an overstatement.
Okay.
But
Really?
I'm always the optimist when it comes to campaigns of the Dallas Cowboys. I go into every season, Aggies too. I go into every season just believing. But we've got some statistics on our side. I know we'll go to a break soon, and when we get back, we can talk about that too. But it is, I would say it's a little bit of an overstatement to say we're in huge jeopardy here. I do think that the Republicans who vote need to show up and vote, and during this midterm election.
Yeah, and what Chelsey alluded to is right. We're going to have to take a break, and as is usually the case with Chelsey and I, just for the sake of good talk radio, we're going to go back and forth. And so I'm going to assume the position of being the Democratic strategist and try to give some numbers that might make a persuasive space and a persuasive argument, and then Chelsey will assume the opposite. And we'll go back and forth to help you all better understand the race that's before us. And then after break as well, we'll be talking about Ted Cruz. Is Ted Cruzing for a bruising, one might be able to say, which again is just very unlikely. But poll numbers continue to show that this race is tightening up relative to Ted Cruz coming in and trying to run for a second term and making his way, and increasingly having to battle up against Beto O'Rourke, who is the representative out of El Paso. And one of the things that's just very interesting to take into consideration is, while the Senate is still in session right now, they pretty much eradicated their August recess. Well, that's a good thing for our judicial appointments that they're continuing to kind of nominate and make sure that they're confirming. But for the downside on the political component, Ted Cruz is in Washington, whereas Beto and the House side has been on recess. So Beto's been able to kind of roam through the state. But nevertheless, we'll talk more about some of that, but we've got to take a break. And so when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the Pete Sessions race as well as the Ted Cruz race. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
If you've seen any of the videos posted showing leftist mobs confronting conservative leaders, you know that we may be one wrong move away from mob violence. The most recent video posted involved Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens of Turning Point USA. They were eating breakfast in a Philadelphia cafe and were verbally assaulted with whistles and bullhorns pushed into their faces. Water was thrown on Kirk, and Owens had to tell one woman with a bullhorn to get out of her face. I've said on my radio program that the slightest move or gesture could be misinterpreted and violence could erupt. Sometimes the perpetrators even seem to be trying to provoke a physical reaction. When Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi attended a movie with her male companion, they taunted him by saying things like, "What are you going to do about it?" They seem to be looking for an excuse to retaliate if he chose to defend her. In a recent commentary, Brandon Morris raises the same concerns I've been voicing. He says that if he was with a colleague, he might not react, but merely put his hands up to show he would not retaliate. But what if he was with a mother or a girlfriend? And what if a small child was with him? He acknowledges that it is easy to ponder these questions while sitting in your office behind a keyboard, but change that to a time when adrenaline is pumping through your system and your heart is pounding in your ears. It doesn't take much imagination to see how incidents could ratchet up into violent territory very easily. One more point. The leftist mob threw water on Charlie Kirk, but until it hit him and he could feel it, how did he know it wasn't acid or some other liquid? No one was arrested. What's to keep another leftist mob from raising the stakes? The bottom line is this. People are going to get hurt unless law enforcement begins to provide some deterrence against leftist mobs. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View on this Millennial Roundtable, August 15th, 2018 day. And if my dad is listening, Joe Pitts, happy birthday, Dad. I just had to go ahead and say that on this National Relaxation Day. Is it a coincidence? No, my dad will probably not be celebrating Relaxation Day, nor does he really ever celebrate National Relaxation Day. But nevertheless, we have been talking about the Pete Sessions seat, specifically the 32nd congressional seat here in Dallas, that's traditionally been kind of a wider margin that Pete Sessions has been able to, I guess, hold off opponents. And really, like you said, Chelsey, in the previous time, it really has just stunningly defeated anyone else that's gone against him. But what's fascinating is that what we continue to hear relative to the national dialogue is that there's a blue wave that's coming. And then even though President Trump has often, over the past couple of days, been trying to talk about a red wave, while there are instances of the red that has been going, there are a significant amount of momentum that is on the Democratic side. And that is working its way out into this local constituency, specifically in the 32nd Congressional District. Pete Sessions is within 2 points, leading right now within the margin of error against Colin Allred. Colin Allred being the former NFL player, a lawyer, civil rights. And so it's just a much closer race than what many would consider. And so Chelsey, try to make a compelling argument right now. If you're trying to help our audience better understand, maybe the numbers are a little bit misconstrued. There's more behind the numbers. The devil is in the details. So tell us, talk with the devil for us.
Okay. Well, my first word of caution is anytime I read an article by any media outlet that all of a sudden says Texas is going blue, which they've been saying for years, by the way. Remember Wendy Davis debacle, and everyone said Wendy Davis was going to make such a great run for governor, and it fell flat on fell flat on her face.
And
it was terrible.
not only did she fall flat, she lost worse than other instances of previous
right.
arrests.
And she had something Aldred doesn't, which was name recognition.
Yeah.
I mean, Wendy Davis had name recognition and was very popular and appealed to younger voters, female voters. So all that to say, I really take it with a grain of salt when I start reading articles about Texas going blue, because I think liberals would love it and nothing more than Texas going blue. I mean, that is absolutely, they're motivated. That's on their agenda. And so we have to actually look at what I always say is like actual political theory and campaign theory. I mean, I have a political science degree, and I always tell my husband that I'm a scientist. And everyone thinks it's probably a complete joke of a degree, but it's not. It is based in some empirical roots, some theory. And there are things that we know that campaigns tend to be successful and some campaigns don't. And there are reasons for why. So just to say that looking at polling data alone is enough to predict an election isn't true. And I think that that's what we saw in 2016 when so many people were blindsided by the election results and Trump's victory was listening to people who don't know political theory making predictions and wanting a liberal to win. Okay, so when we look at our state and we look at Sessions District, we know that he has outraised his Democrat opponent 2 or 3 to 1. Mm-hmm. So he's lapping him when it comes to fundraising, which is indicative of support. Yep. And I do think that does show that he's got motivated supporters. Second, he has name recognition, which is actually one of the top indicators of who's going to win a race is how much do people recognize the name on the ballot. There are often 30, 50 people on these ballots. Yeah. And people often, they check the names they recognize. Well, Pete Sessions, as I mentioned, is a staple of our community, has represented us for years. So he has name recognition, he has the finances, and he's got the record. Yeah. He frankly has a really resounding record, and he's not an unknown quantity. Yeah. Whereas his opponent is. So at that point, it's going to be really who shows up at the polls. I think that's a really interesting point because, again, we can't take for granted the fact that it really is the top of the ticket does drive a lot of individuals. And so in 2016, it was Donald Trump. And Donald Trump was at the top of the ticket, and for better or for worse, that he was an individual that was able to sway a significant amount of the populace in order to vote for Republicans. What's fascinating, though, now is in 2018, you have someone that's much more favorable, especially here in Texas. You've got Governor Greg Abbott is at the top. And so he is going to be an individual. So if you're not the typical type of politico that's watching and paying attention to the news every day, you pretty much can just say, well, I'm better off than I was 4 years ago when I voted for Governor Abbott. And I kind of want to be better off 4 years from now when I vote for Governor Abbott, when I have to vote again. So I think I'm going to go for Governor Abbott. So the top of the ticket is going to dictate it. You're right about the cash on hand, though. So this is where I'll go a little bit back and forth on you. So the article that we posted on the website, and you can go to pointofview.net to be able to find the article that we're referring to on Sessions Up. I thought that was kind of a clever title. Sessions Up is what we have is the cash on hand. Wish. It's just a joke. Okay, so when you have
cash on hand, you've got Pete Sessions. Obviously, he's got $1.9 million in cash, but Colin Allred has $943,000 cash on hand. You've already shown that Sessions has got the name recognition just because he's been in the seat for so long, and Colin Allred does not have the name recognition, and he's also going to need more money to come in order to be able to expand that name recognition. So he's going to have a little bit on him. But I will tell you this: you cannot deny the fact that there is very much an unrest relative to the status quo right now that we're experiencing, and an increasingly diverse populace, especially making its way more diverse here in the 32nd Congressional District, has a propensity and has the capacity to be able to influence what traditionally has been the case for the past 10 years, right? Well, it depends. So let's talk about the congressional line. So where is the district? What? Okay, it's parts of Collin County and Dallas County. So it incorporates pretty much all of Highland Park area. Pretty much all of Richardson, Garland, and parts of Murphy, and then kind of on the border of Rockwall. So it's kind of it is the prototypical gerrymandered district that one might be able to say. So you've kind of got on the east side, you've got blue collar workers, and then probably on the west side, you'll have more white collar workers. Okay. So what that tells me is on the east side, the further away you get from the heart of the city,
more Republican, going to be more red-leaning, and then the closer you get to downtown Dallas, the more it's a Democrat county in a lot of ways, which is why Hillary carried it, we know, in 2016. So, yes, there might be a changing of the tide. There might be people who are disgruntled with the current status quo and ready to mix things up. But at the end of the day, I still think that North Texas is predominantly red over blue, except for the heart of the city, like we're talking about. And, of course, millennial voters do tend to lean blue. However, they're not out voting.
Millennial voters don't vote.
So I almost, when we look at polling data, I want to cut out all of the polling data reflecting millennials' opinions because they don't show up as much. I wish they did. I wish they were more involved. There's not a sense of efficacy for them there showing up at the polls. Studies have shown that, but it really is going to come down to who shows up during the midterms.
I think there's two factors that I think is going to be it will be very positive and beneficial for Colin Allred. You've got an increasingly more educated voting constituency right now. And studies have just continually shown that the more educated, the more time that you spend in the university, the more likely you are to vote Democrat.
There's actually,
okay,
I got to say it. I got to lawyer you. When at the master's degree level, yes, but once people hit their PhD level, there's the opposite effect.
Okay.
And so there's kind of a rounding out there.
Yeah. And so then I would lawyer you. And this is only the lawyer from Law and Order. 1% of the population has a PhD.
Right.
So it's a very small percentage.
You're one of them, actually.
Yeah, I know. It's very lame. And so then you've got the educational factor. And then something I think is something I think we can probably agree on. The tariff situation is just very disadvantageous, I would say, is going to continue to have ripple effects and is significantly going to hit I think it's going to have ripple effects come November. And now, count me if I'm wrong, we continue to be in this battle.
In Dallas?
In Dallas. I would say that it's going to be
a new prediction.
I would say that it's going to be a significant impact in Dallas, especially with what Turkey has just done relative to they're upping the tariffs for electronic goods. And now, granted, I know Turkey, we have very little money invested in Turkey. Turkey has very little buy-in here in the U.S. I think they're ranked 32nd or 33rd relative to exports. And so I don't think the Turkey situation, but I do know that the markets are not very fond of instability and unpredictability to the best that they can. And what the tariff situation has done is what we've continued to see is that our trade war with China that's only escalating right now, and then the ripple effects across the world are going to have, I think, significant impact on entities and individuals significantly within the North Texas area and the 32nd Congressional District.
That's a bold move, Nick. I have a rebuttal. But
as T.I. said, you can go big or you can go home. And so I'm but nevertheless.
I thought you meant Texas Instruments because we're talking about North Texas.
Exactly.
The president of T.I. said that?
But nevertheless, we're going to have to take a break. But when we come back from break, we'll continue talking about this race as well as Ted Cruz, which is going to be much more interesting just because it's statewide as well. And so we will talk a little bit more about that, but we got to take a break. But if you want to call in and add your comment, you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And for those of you watching on Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio, hello, you can leave a comment or message right underneath the live video feed. And then what you share online, we'll share over air. But we'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And we are back on Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined by Chelsey Youman, the First Liberty Institute. We've been talking about Pete Sessions and the 32nd congressional district seat here in Texas, and how this is a much closer race than anyone anticipated, I guess you would say. The individual, Pete Sessions, who had a hand in orchestrating the 63-seat wave back in 2010, now finds himself experiencing potentially another type of wave, but this time being a blue wave. And so we've been going back and forth talking about some of the intricacies and details that might be able to, will either, one, set him over and allow him to kind of continue serving as he's done since, I think, all the way back. And I think it's like 1996 or something like that. Yeah, first elected in 1996. Or will this be the year that really we do see the blue wave kind of come, and blue wave actually touches into North Dallas? And so, Chelsey, it's going to be very interesting when we continue to see that this has just been, we've seen how other big cities have increasingly grown more blue across the U.S., but Texas has just always been very different. We've always just had, there's just been different, whether it's economically, whether it's market driven, whether it's the housing bubble that never,
some would call it the
burst.
Promised Land.
The Promised Land. I think the Bible calls it the land flowing with milk and honey, but nevertheless, it will, this is going to be a very interesting race, not only the Sessions race, but also the Cruz race as well.
Right. And what you were saying before the break, Nick, was that you think that tariffs and some of the implications on our economy that they're going to have are going to negatively influence, I would say negatively, make the state more inclined to go blue, because
it hits us. Like, the thing with tariffs is we can talk about aluminum, we can talk about cotton, and those seem like very far off instances, and so. But what people don't realize is that if we look at Bloom's taxonomy, or if we look at probably Maslow's hierarchy of needs is what I was looking for, people are going to be impacted by what directly affects them first based on their survival. And drink is one of those, clothing is one of those, that's just very basic, instinctual. Like, before we can contemplate life and all the goodness that it is and make some of those decisions, we need to figure out what are the basic survival instincts, i.e., where am I going to get my food? How am I going to clothe my family, et cetera, et cetera. And what we find, though, with the tariffs, when we talk about these ethereal things like aluminum, et cetera, we don't realize how those can drastically impact us in these particular moments. So we think about the rising cost of bread. We think about the rising cost of milk. We think about the rising cost of a can of beer, because that's aluminum. We think about the rising cost of clothes, especially when we're coming in right now to a time of back to school season, and we just happen to miss the tax-free weekend, and now we're experiencing that. So all that to say, I think those will be type of issues that will prove to be a challenge for incumbents, especially since it's hitting them close to home.
Nick, I'm not going to lie to you.
I'm crazy.
I'm not buying what you're selling. I'm not buying what you're selling.
Well, then I'd love to sell you a beachfront home in Idaho.
I say that because I don't think, first of all, that the impact of the tariffs is going to hit North Texas particularly harder than anywhere else.
Okay.
And I don't think any impact, if any, will happen by the time of the midterms. Okay. I don't think we're going to be seeing those changes economically. And I think things that far more impact our economy in North Texas are going to be things like oil and gas, the housing market, more of our industrial side. We've still got companies moving here by
easily
the minute. Amazon might announce by then, which I think it's Bezos' personal goal, by the way, to make Texas blue. And so I could see him just bringing Amazon here with the sole intent of doing that. But Toyota, State Farm, booming economically as a city. And that's not even to mention, if we're gonna talk on the national scale and really pare it down to our microeconomics here, I think that trumps the rest of his policies that are in place, with unemployment being at record lows, unemployment rates. The market has stabilized since tariffs were implemented, and if anything, had record highs over the last 2 years. I really think that people aren't hurting yet economically. I think our economy is strong and it's doing well. And any implications we might have from tariffs will hopefully be temporary. We've talked about this before on the show. I hope they're temporary. I hope it's a negotiation tactic with China to get them to even the playing field. But if the macroeconomics and macro politics are really going to influence us here, I think most Republicans are happier with Trump than they were 2 years ago.
So here's what, and we'll bring it closer to home specifically since this is the Millennial Roundtable. Let's talk about millennials significantly and specifically for the 2018 election. What you saw with millennials in 2016 is that 1 in 4 millennials were the only ones that voted. You wouldn't know that from social media simply because everyone on social media continued to show how they were protesting, how they were against, how they were for certain things. But in actuality, when it came down to it, individuals just weren't voting. Even though that millennials are the largest constituency, they're the largest voting bloc that we have here in the U.S., they didn't show it at the polls. And not only did they not show it at the polls, they also didn't show it when it even comes to registration, which just is very interesting when you think about an individual that was coming out. It's another Tom Steyer, who is a I guess you would say he's a Democrat, has decided that he's hosting a voter registration to really focus and hone in on millennials to try to get them at least registered because they're at historic lows, or I would argue historic lows right now. And so what's fascinating, though, is are millennials going to show up in the 2018? They've largely been very antagonistic and been very against President Trump. Will that have a trickle effect? And will the trickle effect actually lead them to the voting bloc?
No and no.
No?
And we can go home. No, I think, well, first of all, it's midterms.
Okay.
So voter turnout in general, regardless of generation, is going to be a little bit lower, which is why I'm telling all of our listeners to get out and go vote in November. You need to be as motivated, if not more, as the Democrats, because Democrats are angry. They're very angry right now. They've been, frankly, losing on their issues for the first time since last Republican presidency with George Bush. So they're losing for the first time the last 2 years. They're even more inundated, I think, and going to their corner. They're backed into their corner more than ever. They're becoming a little more socialist in their platforms. I mean, the left is a hard left and they're an angry left. And so they are motivated. And I think that if anything makes me nervous about the election, it's not the polling data. It's truly Republicans just being a little too happy right now and too content. And so we sit at home and it's a midterm. I think Republicans need to be as motivated, knowing that really for our issues, there's another side and they're motivated and out there. And if you want to beat your opponent, you have to show up. Millennials I just don't see them showing up. I think they have a history for 10 years now. How long have millennials been able to vote? Really? Yeah. I'm 31, you're 32, we're both millennials.
Yeah. And so millennials,
14 years.
Yeah, I would just say the younger voting bloc is how I would classify it.
But in that time,
individuals 18 to 33 have traditionally not gotten it.
Multiple presidential elections even, they're not voting. And so for the midterms, I don't see them coming out, although no doubt they have strong opinions, right? They're just social justice warriors.
And so here's my contention. Here's my contention, though. My contention is that millennials not only need to be captivated in the mind, but they also need to be swayed in the heart. And so they need to have individuals that are able to rally them not only with knowledge and with facts, but also be able to make emotionally persuasive arguments in order that they might be able to be moved to such an extent that they would sacrifice time in order to go and believe in someone. And that's why I think there was the appeal with President Obama. He was able to utilize facts and frame them in such a way that was persuasive, but also his rhetoric, whether you like him or not, his rhetoric was soaring and it was very persuasive and inspiring to many individuals to go out and vote in droves. And what we see here in 2016 or 2018, again, it goes back to Tip O'Neill. All politics is local. And so while we might not see that from a nationwide level, what we do see is that there are selected instances whereby Democrats or potentially even Republicans are really utilizing and really tapping into the kind of the knowledge base, utilizing facts and arguing them in a persuasive way in order to appeal the heart. And so I'm thinking about individuals like Beto O'Rourke is the reason why there's so much move towards him right now. If we go back to the Texas race, he's really making a very persuasive argument right now, visiting all 200 plus counties. I think it's going to be a very interesting thing for if you're really wanting to tap into millennials. You've got to make the facts, but also you have to appeal to the heart.
I agree with that. I think we know millennials statistically, they care very deeply about social issues, about accountability, and they also care about, I think we recently spoke about this on the show, just making sure that the rhetoric is polite and kind. They care about decorum and diplomacy in our candidates. But I wouldn't sell the Republican candidates short here.
No.
Our Republican candidates, Cruz and Sessions both, they are stellar diplomatic, intelligent. I mean, Harvard grads. They are well spoken. They're intellectual. I don't know that they're not appealing to the millennial youth. I think that the left's issues maybe have them more riled up, and then the left has done a good job. And I'll always say this. I've said this for years. To the left, Republicans are either crazy or stupid. And so as long as they paint us in those categories and make their issues sympathetic, they've got the millennials number. And that's unfortunate, because I think that when it comes down to it on the pro-life issues, millennials are more pro-life generation than any other one. I think we have a chance, an opportunity to do exactly what you're saying, which is to persuade them to be on our side.
Okay. And so we're going to have to take a break. We'd love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or you can jump over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, the little live video feed right now where you can see my face. Right underneath there, you can put a comment or a question, and what you share online, we'll share over air as well. And so we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. High school graduation is filled with pomp and circumstance. It's supposed to be a joyous day as years of study culminate with caps and gowns, hearing everyone's middle names, and mothers weeping with joy. That's the kind of day Sam Blackledge expected. With a perfect 4.0 GPA, Sam earned the position of co-valedictorian of his senior class at West Prairie High School. But as graduates assembled in the small gymnasium surrounded by small farms in rural northwest Illinois, school officials determined that Sam could not give his speech. Why? Because Sam's speech mentioned God. Minutes before the ceremony began, Sam was crushed with the news. The last lesson this school district taught its students is that they should hide their religious beliefs from public view. Sam's only high school graduation was ruined. One wonders how many more graduations must be ruined before school officials learn that the First Amendment protects student remarks at graduation. Sadly, there was a simple solution. As Judge Easterbrook explained, writing in Hedges v. Wakanda Community School District, the school's proper response is to educate the audience rather than squelch the speaker. And if schools can't teach that basic lesson, Judge Easterbrook observes, one wonders whether the schools can teach anything at all. First Liberty represents Sam, hoping to protect future students who wish to reference their religious beliefs while on campus. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. On this August 15th, 2018 day, we've been talking local Texas politics. Specifically, we've been talking about Pete Sessions in the 32nd District. He is in for the race of his life right now because he has got, it's within 2 points that he is up right now. 4 points is the margin of error. So he is within the margin of error right now.
It is debatable as whether it's the race of his life. There's a debate on the table.
Okay. He's potentially in the race for his life. But also someone that's also in quite a race right now is Ted Cruz as well, Chelsey, which is just fascinating.
Yes.
Okay, so here's one of the things that I think is so interesting right now, because it's just fascinating because Texas has just been so deep red for the past 30 years since Ann Richards. Really, you could go back to that race, and so Ann Richards was really one of the last individuals that you saw that kind of captivated the Democratic heart here in the Texas area. But what's fascinating now is you have an individual named Beto O'Rourke, who's a congressman out of El Paso right now.
His name is Francis O'Rourke. His nickname is Beto.
So,
not to be misleading.
Congressman O'Rourke now has bought his first TV ads with $1.27 million he raised from Ted Cruz's attack ads, and he also is running very closely right now. And even if you look at this campaign ad that he put out, one of the things it's titled "Showing Up," and what Congressman O'Rourke did is he went and visited all 254 counties in Texas, and he kind of just documented it. Very much the Millennial Appeal did that.
It is easy to have a widespread and impressive campaign race when you're not doing the job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I'm about to rile up some
Okay.
Texans because I'm riled up about
Keep on.
So yes,
keep on.
I will. Even the Cruz campaign has admitted they need to be focused, and they've got a tough race ahead of them. This isn't going to be an easy battle, no doubt. And O'Rourke is raising a lot of money. But the difference between looking at polling data, I think very important for our listeners, for this Texas statewide Senate race versus polling data for this 32nd district with Sessions, is that the 32nd district polling data reflects those voters. Whereas Texas, I know you're not from here, Nick. I know you're from Tennessee, but we're big.
I've been
it
here
is a big state.
Yeah.
And that means there are a lot of counties, and so much more. I like to think of this much more as like a national race where you're not looking at statewide polling data to determine actual viability of a candidate. You're looking at county by county, precinct by precinct data.
Yeah, there's 254 counties. It's the second largest state in the union. I mean, this is a really big state. That's what makes it all the more impressive that Congressman O'Rourke went and visited every single one.
Yes, that is impressive. I'll give it to him.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
But like you said,
Cruz is not allowed to leave. He's in D.C.
Yeah,
he's doing the job. He's on the Judiciary Committee, which every Texan needs to be very wholly supportive of keeping him there, because he's helping push through all of Trump's nominees and the Republican nominees to get them appointed to the bench. So that has really, I think, limited Cruz's ability to go to every county, because he's working. I mean, he's working for our state right now. He's serving the public right now and getting stuff through right now. But at the end of the day, really, it's going to come down to a county's number game, and Denton County and Collin County are very heavily red and very heavily populated. And so if he wins certain counties, don't forget when you're looking at the polling data that all it takes is him winning certain heavily populated red counties, which I'm certain he already has. And really, O'Rourke can take a lot of other counties, but it would be very hard to beat Cruz in that situation.
So polling data indicates the new poll from Quinnipiac showed that he was just down 6 points. There are certain polls that had a 3.5% margin of error, percentage point margin of error. Another poll had him down by 11 points.
Which one?
So this looked as though the poll, which shows.
Had Cruz down or?
No, had O'Rourke.
Down.
Yeah,
Okay, that's what I thought.
I have seen no poll thus far. I think that's important to say. Even though it's close, and so if you went to Tennessee, for example, a 6-point spread would not be a close. That would be close. Or that wouldn't be close at the end of the day, because, again, there's just certain sways. What makes this so close is that usually you see 10-plus points that are separating this, especially when it's a red-blue and it's not primary. So the fact that he's within 6 points in Quinnipiac, there was another poll I see him that had him down just 2 points, so in a statistical dead heat. With that type of variation, though, again, that really is, it's just showing more. If anything, we learned from 2016, polling data can't be trusted. But at the end of the day, what we continue to see, though, is just the fact that this is a much closer race than what anyone anticipated, and Beto O'Rourke is running a heck of a campaign right now.
I'll give you those 2 points.
And so help me understand, Chelsey, what is it that's so appealing that's causing individuals to give second thought to Congressman O'Rourke?
Well, I don't know. I mean, he's a likable guy.
Yeah, he's a
likable guy,
yeah.
and he is hitting the ground running. He's working very hard. He's generating name recognition, which I think is, an uphill battle. There are things he's doing very right in his campaign.
Yeah.
Will it be enough to overcome the incumbent, who's doing really, really good work, proven tried and true, Senator Cruz, on our issues? I don't know. And that is because it's going to be a county breakdown, not a statewide polling that makes the determination. If it was just a population thing, that would be one thing. But it's not. If he wins Denton, Collin County, some of these other. And we also forget that the Valley and South Texas, even though the Austin County area is liberal, South Texas, it's predominantly Catholic and Hispanic, and they are aligned with Cruz on issues. They just no doubt do. Catholics are very pro-life. They like the conservative stances. Cruz is pro-family, pro-constitution. Cruz is just an outstanding conservative by all conservative platform counts, social and economic or otherwise. So I think that really the Republicans are happy with Cruz. I don't think there's nothing disgruntled there. It's a matter, again, of Republicans getting out and being motivated to vote and keeping Texas red. It should be a motive to every listener we have.
It'll be interesting, I think, just because, it just is fascinating that he's in such a close race right now, especially when he just ran for presidency in 2016, where he was winning to a certain extent in the presidential race, and now he's struggling. I guess it would be an accurate way to be able to describe his campaign right now. But what we know to be true is that Cruz has the conservative bona fides, like you said. The individuals are on his side with these issues.
Well, and there's a difference between saying that Cruz is struggling or that he has a worthy opponent.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know that it's a reflection of Cruz necessarily, just that O'Rourke is hitting the ground running and raising a ton of money. And I think all of our listeners should know this too, because I read this and this fired me up as a Texan. O'Rourke is raising a ton of money, and guess where it's coming from?
Yeah, out of state.
It is not, yes, it is coming from California. So that should get everyone's blood boiling. Get out of our state. This is our issue. It's our senator. It's our representation. And they've got outside influences funding. No doubt, I'm sure Amazon is involved. I'm just going to start these conspiracy theories. Kirby's not here to stop me. But no, he's getting a ton of funding from Californians who want to turn our state blue, and they don't live here. This isn't their senator. So that's where I think it's important for listeners to see that and know that. I don't think that that's a high caliber thing for a candidate to do. I think he should raise the money from within the state that he's running and get the support in his state. And yes, he's hitting the campaign trail hard. Yes, he's got signs everywhere. And he's a worthy opponent of Cruz. But I don't know that Cruz has some kind of weak, bleeding campaign. I don't agree with that.
I think one of the things that's interesting, especially as we close out from a biblical perspective, is the idea that we're to render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and render to God the things that are God's. Now, obviously, Caesar has Caesar's money was given to Jesus, and so Jesus acknowledges that there's a certain tax you might be able to pay. But then he also says, render to God the things that are God's. And obviously, just as the coin had Caesar's face on it, we have the image of God on us. And one of the things that we have to do is to utilize the freedom that he's given to us that's been protected for us by the Constitution, but also utilize that freedom in such a way that might prevail in order that we might be able to exercise our influence in such a way to love our neighbor, and then also hopefully have the opportunity to share the good news of Jesus with our people through our. So we'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View for the second hour on Wednesday, August 15th, 2018. Happy National Relaxation Day, Chelsey. No?
I'm not feeling so relaxed.
Are you not? But nevertheless,
it's a busy week,
we are in studio here for the second hour. During the first hour, for our Dallas and Minnesota audience, we were talking specifically about some of the local Texas races here in the area, specifically Pete Sessions in the 32nd Congressional District, up 2 points on his Democratic opponent, Colin Allred, examining what are some of the rationales and reasons as to why this might have swung this way. And then we also talked a little bit about Ted Cruz's race. Ted Cruz is up by 6 points. Some polls indicate 6 points, others indicate 11 points, but I think the clear trend is that it's much closer than anticipated. And then also the millennial component in that as well. Well, millennials, though they are the largest voting demographic now in the electorate, will they actually come out and vote, unlike they did in 2016, and why might be one of the reasons why they might, as well as why they won't. But we've also are going to transition a little bit, and during the second hour, we'll be talking a little bit about the devastating report that came out yesterday out of Pennsylvania, the Catholic Church, examining some of the allegations of abuse that were perpetuated by priests as well as other leaders in the Catholic Church. We'll talk a little bit about that as well as some of the local races. So we've got Chelsey Youman that's with us here from the First Liberty Institute, and then over the phone as well, we've got Michael McAfee that's here with us. Michael, how are you?
Hey, I'm well. How are you, Nick?
Doing very well. So glad that you could be here with us today.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I wish I could be there with you in person, but it's a pleasure to be connected over the phone.
Yeah, just over the border, over there across the Red River. But nevertheless, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, what you're doing now, and et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. So I am currently, I've been at Museum of the Bible now for 5 years. So wow. The Museum of the Bible is a world-class museum that actually opened in Washington, D.C. We're 3 blocks from the U.S. Capitol last November. And for the last 5 years, I've traveled and kind of helped raise awareness of that project. And we are thrilled. We're on pace to have over 1 million visitors in our first year. I mean, it's just been absolutely unbelievable. Puts us at top 20 museum in the country wow. in terms of attendance. And the museum itself is completely world class. It's privately funded. Not a dime of government funding goes to it. And of the 87 museums in Washington, D.C., Museum of the Bible is the 3rd largest. And so we are very proud of it. Our corporate offices are here in Oklahoma City, and so I work at our corporate offices. I oversee a lot of our outreach and engagement efforts to connect with others who share our mission. Our mission is to invite all people to engage with the Bible. And so do a lot of work in the kind of ministry, nonprofit, religious organization space, and it's a dream come true. My background's in pastoral ministry, and so getting to serve people and encourage people to read the Bible is my life's goal. So
what a great,
I'm really enjoying it.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. And you're also a teaching pastor as well, correct?
I am. Yeah. So I'm a teaching pastor at my local church. So I travel and preach and speak often, and then on my nights and weekends, I study ethics with an emphasis in public policy through Southern Seminary. I'm studying under Dr. Russell Moore. So my wife actually is doing the same program with me, so I just get to cheat off of her.
I love it. I love it.
It's a lot of fun.
Well, Michael, we're so glad to have you here with us today, and so we'll just be kind of running through the news. And so for those of you that are interested, you're watching on Facebook right now, hello, and you can leave a comment or question on facebook.com/pointofviewradio. you want to share at all, what you share online, we'll try to share over air. And as always, we'll be opening up the phone lines here soon, 800-351-1212. But we're going to go ahead and jump into the first news article of the day. And Chelsey, this is kind of just this is a hard topic. And it really was just devastating when I heard it. So the new grand jury report out that kind of indicates, according to internal documents, that from 6 Catholic dioceses in Pennsylvania show that more than 300 predator priests have been credibly accused of sexually abusing more than 1,000 child victims. And according to the report, it says, quote, "We believe that the number of real number of children whose records were lost or who were afraid to ever come forward is in the thousands." And as you were saying over the break, there's over 7,000 potentially child victims.
That's what the Attorney General of Pennsylvania would predict, he said.
And it's just, and you know, Chelsey, I thought that we were through with this when the Boston Globe broke out with their stellar reporting on just this tragedy that's just been perpetuated. But I think one of the just tragic and troubling things, as I just continue to think about it, is this was solely located in one state, to know the devastating effect that one state had. But then 2, just to think about all the countless lives that have been forever changed to the detriment because of what these men that were supposed to be good, the harm that they did to these people.
Yeah, it is just devastating. There's no other word for it. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of victims and families, and now no doubt psychological implications, if not worse, for their families continuing. I mean, really the wages of this sin and the consequences of this sin are truly just sick and devastating. And so my heart goes out to all the victims, to their families, and to those involved. And I just am also really angry. You know, I think that a word that comes to mind for the church is systemic at this point. You know, we were a lot younger. I was a lot younger, at least, when the Boston Globe story broke, and that was a huge controversy. And I just wonder, how many more have to occur before we really understand how to get to the bottom of this as a society. And the Vatican hasn't responded, from what I most recently heard. But we know the last pope actually stepped down over an inability to get this under control. Yeah. And so there's a huge issue here, and one that I'm glad is now finally being prosecuted.
Yeah, this plus 1,000 page report, Michael, was just so, just for all intents and purposes, was just so stinging and also just so tragic. I was reading over some of it last night, and I kept on, and there were instances where, I know this is going to sound graphic, but I think a lot of this is it's really helpful just for us to understanding the devastating consequences. You've got priests that were saying that they were doing cancer checks on children. There was one instance where where a victim was denied receiving any more counseling services, and then within 3 months ended up committing suicide. Michael, this is just another reminder of just the power that the church holds for betterment or for worse as well.
Exactly right. Yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, you look at, you mentioned a couple, just skimming through the report and seeing some of the fallout of what was happening. It was not. There was clear. It's clear that this has been a problem within the church, and that it was planned. I mean, that there were young children that were being groomed, and even an example of one that was given like a necklace of some type to kind of mark them as being groomed for abuse. And so it really is devastating to consider these men that were seen as spiritual authorities, as someone that's safe, to go to fall in this way, and to not only sin by doing unspeakable acts to young children, but then covering it up and not allowing it to be brought to light, and is just devastating. I mean, quite honestly, it's hard to read. It's hard to even talk about what has happened, because you clearly, I mean, my experience with the church has been so positive, and you want to have confidence that the church is a safe place to go.
And we've got to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to kind of think through some of the implications for this and all that and more. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
If you've seen any of the videos posted showing leftist mobs confronting conservative leaders, you know that we may be one wrong move away from mob violence. The most recent video posted involved Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens of Turning Point USA. They were eating breakfast in a Philadelphia cafe and were verbally assaulted with whistles and bullhorns pushed into their faces. Water was thrown on Kirk, and Owens had to tell one woman with a bullhorn to get out of her face. I've said on my radio program that the slightest move or gesture could be misinterpreted and violence could erupt. Sometimes the perpetrators even seem to be trying to provoke a physical reaction. When Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi attended a movie with her male companion, they taunted him by saying things like, "What are you going to do about it?" They seem to be looking for an excuse to retaliate if he chose to defend her. In a recent commentary, Brandon Morris raises the same concerns I've been voicing. He says that if he was with a colleague, he might not react, but merely put his hands up to show he would not retaliate. But what if he was with a mother or a girlfriend? And what if a small child was with him? He acknowledges that it is easy to ponder these questions while sitting in your office behind a keyboard, but change that to a time when adrenaline is pumping through your system and your heart is pounding in your ears. It doesn't take much imagination to see how incidents could ratchet up into violent territory very easily. One more point. The leftist mob threw water on Charlie Kirk, but until it hit him and he could feel it, how did he know it wasn't acid or some other liquid? No one was arrested. What's to keep another leftist mob from raising the stakes? The bottom line is this. People are going to get hurt unless law enforcement begins to provide some deterrence against leftist mobs. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as Michael McAfee's joining us over the air or on the phone right now of the Museum of the Bible. And we have been talking about the tragic story that came out of Pennsylvania yesterday. Grand jury report finally came out, 1,000 plus pages documenting over 300 predatory priests that preyed on upwards of 1,000 to maybe even 7,000 children. And just some of the examples that we continue to hear about. It's just it's sad in and of itself. It's just absolutely tragic. It's abysmal. It's evil. Like
it's just evil.
I couldn't remember. I couldn't help but think of in Ezekiel 8. There's this picture in Ezekiel 8 of God taking Ezekiel, giving him a hole into the wall in order that he can see the heinous crimes that are being perpetuated by the priests. It's like what happened in Ezekiel 8. This grand jury report is God pulling it back a little bit for us to see. Chelsey, it's just so systemic. One, I think it's just the devastating component of it too. And then even if we think about it from a legal standpoint, we've got to see, there's got to be justice done, right? Mm-hmm. Like the church has been given a very privileged position here in the U.S., just like any other religious institution, especially from with your specialty, because our founders believe it to be true that churches produce virtue, and virtuous citizens are good allies of limited government. But what we're seeing in this instance is nothing like that.
Right.
And now, granted, this is very systemic. It's very pervasive. And I'm not trying to say that there's not good that's coming out of the Catholic Church, specifically in Pennsylvania. But this is just such a damning document. It's just despicable.
Right. I mean, there's no other term for it. It's evil. It's despicable. And I guess your question on the break was, where is the line between religious liberty and allowing churches to operate and really like the government intervening. And I just think it's a really easy line here, and that is criminal conduct. I mean, this is criminal assault, sexual assault and abuse. And that's really different than protecting a church's right to their religious practice and their religious exercise and the right to worship and the right to pray. This is complete apples and oranges. So I think that the line is really clear there. And no doubt, the legal standard for anyone who cares about this, but would be compelling interest, and the government actually has a complete compelling interest in protecting children and preventing criminal activity and harm from coming to them. So there's really just apples and oranges here. Yeah, it's a great question, though.
Yeah. So Michael, help us to understand, especially let's just think about it from a millennial standpoint. All three of us, we grew up in a world in which the Catholic Church has always been struggling with this. This has always just been a controversy that's kind of surrounded the Catholic Church ever since that we were kind of able to ascertain it. And I don't know about some of your friends, but I look at some of the numbers and then also just some of the trust factor that churches, that millennials have relative to churches. And this doesn't help that any at all. Would you say so? What would be your thoughts?
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, not only the church and faith, but even just when it comes to the Bible, when you look at polling data and millennials' response to scriptures, one of the biggest problems that they have with the Bible actually has nothing to do with the biblical text itself, but has to do with people and the wrongs that have been done by people. And so we absolutely should seek justice in this case, not only because it's what is best and what is right for society, but it's because what God desires. So Proverbs 21:15, when justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. That it is important for us as a society and us as the church to say, regardless of what denomination we are, if there is evil that is happening within the church walls, that we have to regulate that ourselves, and we have to put whatever means necessary to make sure that we are above reproach. And if not, and if we've not been, and there is some form of sexual abuse or something that is criminal like this, then absolutely the state has the right. Chelsey's exactly right, to step in and to bring about justice, because it becomes a larger issue than that. And as we do that, and as we see justice being done in the church, and as a church becomes a safe place, I do think that it gives us more credibility when we're honest with our mistakes in the minds of millennials, both for the church and Christianity and also for the scriptures themselves.
Yeah, so Chelsey, I think one of the interesting things, especially when you look at millennials, is there's this desire for authenticity, and authenticity takes a variety of forms, probably as many forms as there are people in the room, a desire to be able to see that worked out. And I think this is going to be a very up for our own, but really just trying to admit wrong in this particular moment.
Well, that's all you can do. I mean, you can't look at this as anything other than pure, like you said, evil. That's what this is. Rampant and protected within the church, and perhaps to some extent the community or law enforcement. That's my first question: is how, if it's as systemic as 7,000 victims, children victims, that in one state alone, that just tells me so much about the power that the Catholic Church had in the area, and really the shame and silence of the victims. I mean, it's just a really terrible thing that has to be eradicated. It has to be addressed. And I'm not even sure where you go from here. I don't even know. I think the Attorney General's probably got a better idea of, just massive prosecutions, throwing people in jail. That's the beginning. But there's also the victim aspect of this, that there needs to be, healing and therapy and things that take place to hopefully try to help to some extent. But yes, the Christian church has a duty. Well, any human, I think, really has a duty to look at this for what it is and call it what it is.
Yeah, I think that was one of the interesting things that I saw, Michael, is that, we just saw the systemic nature of it. So it wasn't just a couple of rogue priests that were operating over this past 70 years to be able to perpetuate this wrong. There was instances, I read one instance where a priest was told that he was no longer going to be able to practice, be a part of the priesthood anymore. And so he asked for a recommendation to be able to go work in Disney World. And he received that recommendation. It's just so systemic. So there's a part of me that just wonders, where do you even start when you see something so significant And then two, maybe help us, some of our listeners, like, how do you respond to your non-believing friends right now when they're wondering, they've already got the preconceived notion of hypocrisy within the church, and now this news has come out, and it touches on so many people just because, I mean, many of us are interconnected relative to having young children, either within our own families or whether it's within our extended families. For the listener that's out there right now, how do you help them, give them some words to be able to help to respond to this if they happen to encounter an unbeliever?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I think first being honest about what the problem is. I mean, that's also, your first question about where to start. That's where you have to start is seeing what is the problem? How bad is it? So we can begin addressing it, brick by brick. And for the person that, maybe is listening that has a friend that this is a big obstacle for them, this is a challenge for them in considering faith, is seeing the hypocrisy, we have to own it. We have to own it, that there absolutely is hypocrisy in the church and in our own lives, and clearly that the church has failed society, has failed people, humanity, in a myriad of ways. And this is a principal way, a very public way that we have failed, and we have to our instinct often as people who love the church and know that Jesus died for the church is to defend the church, but we just have to be honest that this is not what God desires, and the church has failed in its duties here, and yet the gospel is still good. The gospel is still true. Jesus is still God, and that the beautiful news of the gospel is that Jesus died for the hypocrisy of the church, and he died for my own hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. Even if someone wasn't a believer, they would say you shouldn't sexually abuse children, and they would also say you shouldn't lie, and they would say you shouldn't, steal, and et cetera, et cetera. And so, even by their own standards, if they don't believe the Bible, they've broken their own sort of moral code. And Jesus died for that. That if they would turn and believe in Him, and so I think that's what I would encourage is to own the hypocrisy that exists within the church, and own your own personal hypocrisy, that we don't live up to our own standards, and that Jesus died for both of them, that it points to our need for Christ, rather than the power of the gospel being dependent on the purity of the church. It's dependent on Christ's work on the cross.
Yeah, that's a really good word. We're going to have to take a commercial break, but when we come back from the commercial break, we'll continue. We'll open up the phone line so that you might be able to respond to, how did you respond? What is your point of view relative to what's happening in the Catholic Church, specifically in Pennsylvania right now with the report out? Again, the news is just tragic. It spanned over 70 years, this report, over 300 predatory priests that preyed upon upwards of 7,000 children, and that have been their lives have been drastically influenced. We're going to open up the phone lines. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And for those on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, you can leave a message or a comment on the page underneath the video feed, and then what you share online, we'll try to get to over air as well. But we're going to take a commercial break, but when we come back, we'll continue talking more about the Catholic Church as well as other issues. We'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and also Michael McAfee from the Museum of the Bible. And we have been talking a little bit about what's happened relative to the Catholic Church. Reports came out yesterday from a grand jury that indicated that there were more than 300 predatory priests that preyed upon and victimized upwards of 7,000 children that they could many that they could account for, but also the vast majority of them that were either unafraid to come forward or those that are no longer with us. And so it was just tragedy what's happening in Pennsylvania. And one can't help but wonder, that was just one state in particular that examined over 70 years. What would it look like for the other 49 states, as well as the Catholic Church that from around the world, Chelsey? Because like we continue to see, this was so systemic in nature that you just want, like, the what if, right? Like the tragedy always breeds questions. And especially with this instance, it just brings one of those questions is, well, what if? What are some of the areas that it could have also affected that we just didn't see in the report?
Well, I think there's no telling how rampant these crimes are and how systemic it is. There's no way to understate it. And we do know that there are just so many victims now that are coming to light and being really brave and courageous. And I don't know how you go about even beginning to eradicate this or to prosecute this, for lack of a better term. We have law enforcement officers. I don't know where you really begin, but I am devastated to hear this and know that something needs to be done.
Yeah. And so, Michael, help us from a church standpoint, because we saw that this was again, it was more than just individual priests, isolated incidents. There was almost a systemic thing going on. And we know that this isn't just exclusively a part of the Catholic Church as well. Tragically, there's been incidents of kind of sexual abuse that's been happening in Protestant churches as well. And so if you're a Protestant listener right now, if you're someone that's at a Baptist church, a non-denominational church, what have you, you are also keenly aware within your community, especially in this Me Too movement era, of just instances where wrongs have been wronged. And so how can church leaders, specifically if you're listening right now, begin to take steps so that it doesn't become systemic in nature, but as a church leader, you can identify, point it out, and acknowledge wrong is wrong, evil is evil, and justice must be served?
Absolutely. Nick, I think that's such a good question, because I think the temptation is to see this as something that's sort of separate from your church if you're not Catholic, or, but like you mentioned, like this is a reality that could be happening in any one of our churches. And so I think the first thing is that for a church and the leadership of the church to come up with a plan now of both how you're going to protect your church from ever having something like this, and how you would handle a crisis situation immediately. I was with a leader last week who talked about how whenever about once a month or so, he'll walk into his leadership team and throw out a crisis situation and just kind of wrestle through how would we handle this, because he wants them to be prepared. And I think that that's so important, because clearly if you're a part of the Catholic Church, and especially if you're at the Vatican right now, that's what right now they've not publicly responded to my knowledge, and I'm sure they're wrestling through how do we handle this. And so preparing yourself now is so key, and there's great organizations that help with that you can get. I know that at Southern Seminary they have all of their students go through a Ministry Safe program. It's an organization that just kind of helps to prepare and educate on some of the ways that we can protect children in our ministries and be free of sexual abuse from within organizations. And you've got to do it. It's so central to who we are. We are a people that love and care for others, and we should be a place that's safe for them to come in and that they can feel like they can trust their leaders.
Yeah.
So any pastor or any church leader that can make a plan now before something happens.
Yeah, the church has got to be a safe place, right, Chelsey? It's got to be a place that does that.
And Michael, those are really great points, and it gets me to thinking that in order for something to be allowed to happen for this long, over this many years, and be this pervasive, it tells me that the church itself and the leadership itself was providing cover for the behavior, and to some extent, and if not openly endorsing it, protecting it, hiding it, because there's just no way for this many priests to be involved without each other knowing about it. And so creating ways that it's, that no man or human on this earth is higher than the authority of God and what God has told us to do in our church, which is to minister and care for others and love for others. Not allowing any one individual, either staff member or pastor or otherwise, become that just above not only the law, but God's law. And I think that's what we've seen here, is just idolizing to too much of an extent people and enabling them to get this far.
Yeah. And so just recently, and so we'll continue to go back to this. 5 minutes ago, the Catholic Church has declined to respond to these allegations. To quote, the Vatican has declined to respond to an explosive grand jury report detailing decades of sexual abuse and cover-ups by priests and bishops in Pennsylvania, and that's according to CNN. So just within 5 minutes ago, the Catholic Church has said that we are not going to respond to this. But one of the things that we will do here at Point of View is we want to open up the phone lines to you. We'd love to hear your response to what's happening and potentially any point of view that you might be able to add to that. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or if you're on Facebook.com/pointofviewradio, you can leave your question or comment there, and we'll be able to get to that as well later on. We're going to jump on over to Edward right now. Edward, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Edward. What is your point of view?
Well, I was just looking over the report from CNN, which is not my favorite reporting agency, but one of the points I'd like to make is that we're jumping the numbers from 1,000 already up to 7,000. Now, I'm not Catholic, and I'm not making excuses for these guys. I know this has been going on. We've heard it many times, but I don't think we should exaggerate on the higher numbers. I also believe that, as I've said before, I think evidence needs to be examined. I think there's a lot of people out there that hate the church. I don't know if families or victims, or especially children, would ever grow up and have that feeling in them where they would need to say something that wasn't true. But I wondered if, with this many of these cases suddenly being examined all at one time and all this stuff going on nationwide, there's so much hate for the church out there. And I wonder if that's got something to do with this. It seemed to be sort of a fad to do things like this out in Hollywood. I'm wondering if it's moving to the church, because the church is under a lot of fire right now on several different, from several different places and organizations and stuff. And I'm not saying that this hasn't happened to these people. And, my heart goes out to the ones that it did, but I really hope that this grand jury has evidence instead of just testimony, because I think that it is, especially priests, And the second, when I was a kid and I first found out that Catholic priests were not allowed to get married, I asked my preacher, I said, don't you think that's wrong? These guys are just like anybody else. They're human. So I don't know, maybe that was part of it. Maybe they need to be married. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah. Edward, you bring up a great point relative to the number of victims. And Chelsey, you had something to add to that.
Sure. I'll definitely clarify that point where we're getting our numbers from, because I don't want to mislead anybody. The first, that there is 1,000 reported victims from the formal Attorney General report. But he also stated that due to embarrassment or shame or whatever the reasons, sex assault victims usually do hide the situation or don't come out for years at a time, don't feel safe to do so, or are members of their community and don't want this to shed light on their past trauma. So the Attorney General said his estimate of the real number is closer to 7,000 victims, but they have 1,000 verified.
Wow. Okay. So that kind of gives us a overview on the number, but at the end of the day, it's a reminder from what Jesus even said. If you cause one of these little ones,
I was going to say, if it's one, I don't even care.
Yeah, and so that it's just a despicable act, to say the very least. Yeah. And then just to also say that, the number, we might not have a clear definition on the victimhood number, but what we do know is that God knows every action that's happened, every wrong action that's happened, and then the right actions that could have happened that stemmed that number from being even higher. And there's no evading his judgment or his passing eye. And it'll just be interesting. But one of the things that we've got to do is we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking about the Catholic Church and the scandal that just has continued to rock not only the headlines, but also the lack of response from the Catholic Church right now. And so you can call in as well, 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You leave your question online and we'll share it over air as well. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back, I'll be joined by Chelsey Youman and also Michael McAfee. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. High school graduation is filled with pomp and circumstance. It's supposed to be a joyous day as years of study culminate with caps and gowns, hearing everyone's middle names, and mothers weeping with joy. And that's the kind of day Sam Blackledge expected. With a perfect 4.0 GPA, Sam earned the position of co-valedictorian of his senior class at West Prairie High School. But as graduates assembled in the small gymnasium surrounded by small farms in rural northwest Illinois, school officials determined that Sam could not give his speech. Why? Because Sam's speech mentioned God. Minutes before the ceremony began, Sam was crushed with the news. The last lesson this school district taught its students is that they should hide their religious beliefs from public view. Sam's only high school graduation was ruined. One wonders how many more graduations must be ruined before school officials learn that the First Amendment protects student remarks at graduation. Sadly, there was a simple solution. As Judge Easterbrook explained, writing in Hedges v. Wakanda Community School District, the school's proper response is to educate the audience rather than squelch the speaker. And if schools can't teach that basic lesson, Judge Easterbrook observes, one wonders whether the schools can teach anything at all. First Liberty represents Sam, hoping to protect future students who wish to reference their religious beliefs while on campus. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as Michael McAfee of the Museum of the Bible. And we have been talking about the Catholic Church, and specifically the stinging report that came out yesterday out of a grand jury that indicated this very systemic issue that was happening in Pennsylvania relative to the abuse of children. And we have been taking some of your phone calls and comments as well. We'll continue doing that at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we're going to jump on over to North Carolina right now. We've got George on the line. George, are you there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Oh, yes, sir. Hey.
You know, as a minister and a retired lawyer, I am just incredibly shocked that no one in the Catholic Church, from the Vatican down, have said enough is enough. Mm-hmm. We need to do something about how we accept ministers, train ministers, and who qualifies. Mm-hmm. All you need is a PhD in theology or religion to qualify as a Catholic minister, Methodist, Episcopalian, Presbyterian, United Methodist. And they're not looking at the sexual nature of the person. You can't make a heterosexual a celibate. Apostle Paul makes that very clear in the 7th chapter of 1 Corinthians. He said, if you don't have the gift, then you should not burn in your lust, marry, if you desire a wife. And The Catholic priests take these men who are heterosexuals, try to make them celibate, and as the last caller said, won't allow them to marry and have wives. And this is an ancient problem with them. They need to they need to reconstitute, bring their head out of the sand, and admit they have one serious problem. Pennsylvania's probably the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I think that was one of the. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that was one of the interesting things you bring up, George, is the fact that this is it's just very isolated and it's very limited in nature, and it does raise that question of what if, what else is there to hide? What is being hidden right now? Because this was only Pennsylvania. The Boston Globe reporting from Spotlight that kind of spurred the great movie that made out that indicated that this was much more systemic in nature in the Boston area as well. And it does raise questions relative to the doctrines that they've kind of moved forward. But and Michael, you'd be able to speak to this pretty well as a teaching pastor. It's the idea that there's a great responsibility as well as a high standard for an individual that wants to shepherd the flock of God. I think Paul has made that very clear. Peter makes that very clear, of the idea that you're to be above reproach, that you're to keep your household in order, that you're to keep careful guard of your teaching. You're to there's just so many stipulations that the Lord has given to us through His Word for individuals that feel the call and feel the responsibility to be able to lead God's people not only into holiness but also to help them to be an impact into the community. And again, God is going to doubly judge those relative to their teaching, right?
Precisely. Yeah, that we are warned in the New Testament, particularly in the pastoral epistles, that a harsher judgment is coming for those who preach and teach God's word. And so we should watch ourselves and inspect our own lives and to clearly show restraint. That if in the Catholic Church doctrine that they require their priests to be celibate, that they do need to show restraint, and that the same way that the Lord Jesus did. He was a fully human man who did not know anyone sexually and lived a life of perfect celibacy, and we are called to follow in that example, not by our own strength, but by the power of the Holy Spirit, and in the same way that in a marriage relationship where sex is permitted and encouraged in Scriptures, that you have times where you have to show restraint. The same is true outside. And so I do agree that it is right for us to, what the caller was saying, that it's not right for those Catholic priests, obviously, to do anything outside of marriage, any kind of sexual contact outside of marriage, let alone abusing children. But to say that the solution is simply to change their doctrine in order to make it easier, I think sells short and kind of sells those priests short of that they do have the ability, through the power of the Holy Spirit, to show restraint. And so that's almost too simple of an excuse because we're called to live to a higher standard. And so I'm clearly, like we've talked about, just brokenhearted for the Catholic Church on this day, recognizing that if not by the grace of God, there would go I also. And really, with, I'm sure, the rest of the nation and the world calling on them to, like the caller said, to put an end to this and say enough is enough and do whatever is necessary to make sure this doesn't happen moving forward. Completely true.
We're going to jump on over to Illinois right now. We've got Louis in Illinois. Louis, are you there?
Oh, I'm there.
Hey, Louis, what's your point of view?
I think the point of view of this Catholic Church scandal, these children are being abused by those priests. It's just like the guy said, it's time to say enough is enough. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. We need to pray, because the church is under attack of this horrifying scandal.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's one of the, especially that's just a very poignant
I agree.
Application point for us out of this is to understand what even Paul said in 1 Corinthians, to stand firm lest you think you can fall. It's the idea of don't think that this can't happen to you, because we live in a broken world and we just need to be constantly aware of that. And Chelsey, I think this is a good reminder for us just to one, there's legal standpoints that we need to consider, legal rationales that we need to consider, but just something very practical in nature, just to pray for your pastor, pray for your church right now, how you might be an instrument and how they might be kept pure from kind of the brokenness of the world, but also, too, how you might be able to show responsibility and to help make the church what the church was intended to do, which is proclaim the glory of God, the glories of God through the gospel, but also to live out and extend the kingdom come and make his will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Absolutely. And I think that, unfortunately, it's almost like we've heard this narrative before. We've heard this before because there have been so many scandals with the Catholic Church. But I, of course, think of the millions and millions of people that are being human trafficked a day.
Oh, yeah.
And unfortunately, a large predominant amount of slaves today are sex slaves. We have human trafficking in our country, and it's a major problem. And so, yes, this has to be addressed, but we also have to open our eyes to a huge issue that's rampant in our country, which is sexual sin and resulting in assault and criminal activity, and figuring out as a society what we as a society are going to do to protect the innocent of our children and to protect them from harm. I mean, it is our duty as adults to not put them in these situations and to protect children and to learn as a society, even if it is just figuring out what does it look like for there to be a trafficker or a pimp. We've heard so many stories of kids getting out of slavery because, a U.S. postal worker this week even figured out that the girl was not with her father. And we really need to start figuring out as a society what we're going to do about this problem.
Yeah. And so we're going to have to take a break, but when we come back from the break, we'll kind of transition out of talking about the Catholic Church, and we'll go back to talking about the election of 2018, some of the implications of things that are happening in Washington right now. Will that be able to stir us, or will that be more of, will that be able to cause a red wave, a blue wave? Who knows? And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, and then we'll kind of settle up the conversation about the Catholic Church, because all the phone lines are busy right now with individuals that want to share their opinion. And so, but we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we'll talk more about the Catholic Church and the election of 2018. But if you'd like to phone in, you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212, or hop on a View Radio and share that comment as well. And we'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts, on this Wednesday, August 15th, 2018 day. Happy National Relaxation Day for this Millennial Roundtable Point of View. I'm joined in studio by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. Chelsey, how are you today?
I'm doing well today.
So good to have you here. And over the phone, we've also got Michael McAfee of the Museum of the Bible that is joining us over phone. Michael, it's always so good to have you here.
Hey, great to be with you. Thanks.
Oh, very neat. And so we've been talking a little bit over the past 2 hours about a wide assortment of things. During the first hour, we were talking specifically for our Dallas audience. We were talking about some of the local races that are affecting us here and just kind of some of the influencing factors and aspects of that. Everything from Pete Sessions in the 32nd District. He's only up by 2 points, which has traditionally been a much larger, if you look historically, much larger margin he usually holds, but nevertheless, this is a different race, as well as Ted Cruz's race against Beto O'Rourke. So Beto is down by only 6 points right now, according to the latest Quinnipiac poll. And we kind of examined a little bit more about what might be the reason why these individuals are polling so closely in these traditionally deep red districts in this deep red state. And so then during the second hour, we talked and took a little bit more of your phone calls relative to the tragic Catholic Church report that came out yesterday that indicated that upwards of 300 priests were preying and were predators upon anywhere from 1,000 that was documented, that estimates from the Attorney General indicated that it could be upwards of 7,000 children that were preyed upon and were victimized due to the heinous and evil crimes of these priests as well, and just some of the implications from that, just because the church has always been known, I mean, even historically from a founder's perspective, the church and religious entities, by and large, have been known to produce virtue. Virtue is a good ally of a limited government, but these are instances where there was not good that was being perpetuated, but really was evil. But as we believe it to be true from James 1:17, we have a Father of all lights that illuminates all, and this was just another illumination that happened that was tragic one, but also offers us the opportunity to be able to move forward. And during this third hour, we're going to talk a little bit more about President Trump, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the implications that are coming out and what are some of the sizing up the midterms that are going to be happening in less than 3 months now, Chelsey. It's hard to believe that the 2018 midterms are finally broaching in on us, and what kind of is centered around this is largely kind of this idea of wave imagery in particular. And so there's been instances and reports largely about a potential blue wave that will be sweeping across the country, indicative of kind of the forecast that Democrats are going to be switching up the House, they'll be switching up the Senate, because what they're positioning is that the 2018 midterm election will be a referendum. And
can our listeners hear me shake my head no to all of this?
You whip your head back and forth, according to Willow. But nevertheless, there's been one competing narrative that this will be a blue wave, that individuals are going to be flocking to the polls. And then there's other instances where especially from President Trump through his Twitter, that he's indicating that this will be a red wave instead. But I think what we all can agree on is the centrality of President Trump during this midterm election. that there are many that want to position this as a referendum on them. And then President Trump has shown the ability to be able to give his tweet endorsements that provide a bump for individuals. But so let's just look at the character of President Trump, specifically as he's been in the news as of late. And so this will be something I'm really interested in on your phone calls as well. And so reports indicate that at least aides to President Donald Trump questioned him during the 2016 campaign about the existence of an audio tape in which he purportedly said the N-word, the racial epithet, during the production of his reality TV show Apprentice. There has been instances where this was largely brought on by the former President Trump aide Omarosa of the reality TV show The Apprentice. But now it seems as though there's been some speculation that this tape is out there. And Chelsey, there's a part of me, one, that thinks to myself, if this tape is out there, I would assume that this tape would have already surfaced.
That was my very first thought too.
Because at the end of the day, I mean, he's already said he ran
for office where every dirt from every tape forever came up against him.
And there was similarly shocking language that was used as well. And so I would assume that if he had said this, that it would have come out already, which was I just thought was very shocking, the idea. But if there is such a tape, I mean, we can all agree this is just language that's just not good. It's very derogatory. It's wrong. It's just wrong language.
Right. It would be indefensible if he said that.
Yeah. And so but here's something else also kind of similar to this, which I think is very interesting. And I would be really interested to hear your comments as well, is the idea of his continual usage of calling individuals dogs. And what's been fascinating is that the media has made much of him in one of his tweets calling Omarosa a dog. And so I did a little bit of research, Chelsey, because I've got this bent on me right now. And so there's other instances. Here are other individuals he calls dogs. He's called David Gregory a dog. He called Mitt Romney a dog. He called Steve Bannon a dog. Bill Maher a dog. Ariana Huffington a dog. Glenn Beck a dog. Eric Erickson a dog.
Glenn Beck?
Glenn Beck
So
a
does
dog.
he mean it like the guy on American Idol where it's kind of a...
Yo dog? Randy? No. I think these were all negative.
Oh, okay.
These are not...
Glenn Beck is on our side.
Yeah. And then also he called Kristen Stewart a dog I don't know if you remember Robert Pattinson of Twilight fame. He called Kristen Stewart a dog for cheating on Rob Pattinson. So this is, I think this is one of the, I know there was a big push to be able to say that this was not necessarily, this was more derogatory in nature, but it seems as though this is just kind of one of his kind of kicks that he has. He just calls people dogs. And so I don't think that there was any racially tinged to it. I don't think it was derogatory towards female. I think this is just one of his insults that he gives people, that people are making much ado about something that he has continually just called people dog for.
That's a pretty long list.
Yeah, and that's not even an exhaustive list of it.
It must be just part of his rhetoric. There's a lot about Trump's rhetoric and Twitter feed. I mean, there's a lot to the things that he says that is very the opposite of PC, right?
Yeah.
That I find hard to defend, and I don't think shows a high level of, decorum or diplomacy or politeness, certainly to his adversaries. But I think that people kind of like that he's willing to be glib and that he's willing to throw punches back at people. Now, I can't speak to the context of what we're talking about today when it relates to filming and the N-word. I mean, I don't know anything about that, and if it is true, that's, like I said, indefensible. But it goes along with the nature of our president and what we've seen for years now out of him. He's uncensored.
And I think that'll be one of the things that we touch on. We've got to take a break, but one of the things that I want to really touch on is the differentiation with President Trump relative to substance and relative to rhetoric right now. Because from a substance standpoint, there's many things that conservatives can lift up and can celebrate over, but then there's some rhetoric that it's just increasingly hard for individuals to be able to defend and to be able to defend from an intellectually honest standpoint. And so I think that will be one of the things that I really want to touch on, especially from a Christian standpoint, where you believe it to be true that the mouth is like a rudder of a ship, right? And then the mouth is also a revealer of the heart as well. And so I think we're going to touch more on that specifically when we get back from the break. But we've got to go take a break. But when we come back, we'll talk more about President Trump, the substance, but also the rhetoric, right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
If you've seen any of the videos posted showing leftist mobs confronting conservative leaders, you know that we may be one wrong move away from mob violence. The most recent video posted involved Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens of Turning Point USA. They were eating breakfast in a Philadelphia cafe and were verbally assaulted with whistles and bullhorns pushed into their faces. Water was thrown on Kirk, and Owens had to tell one woman with a bullhorn to get out of her face. I've said on my radio program that the slightest move or gesture could be misinterpreted and violence could erupt. Sometimes the perpetrators even seem to be trying to provoke a physical reaction. When Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi attended a movie with her male companion, they taunted him by saying things like, "What are you going to do about it?" They seem to be looking for an excuse to retaliate if he chose to defend her. In a recent commentary, Brandon Morris raises the same concerns I've been voicing. He says that if he was with a colleague, he might not react, but merely put his hands up to show he would not retaliate. But what if he was with a mother or a girlfriend? And what if a small child was with him? He acknowledges that it is easy to ponder these questions while sitting in your office behind a keyboard, but change that to a time when adrenaline is pumping through your system and your heart is pounding in your ears. It doesn't take much imagination to see how incidents could ratchet up into violent territory very easily. One more point. The leftist mob threw water on Charlie Kirk, but until it hit him and he could feel it, how did he know it wasn't acid or some other liquid? No one was arrested. What's to keep another leftist mob from raising the stakes? The bottom line is this. People are going to get hurt unless law enforcement begins to provide some deterrence against leftist mobs. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, joined by Chelsey Youman here in studio, as well as Michael McAfee over the phone as well. And we have been talking about the rhetoric of President Trump and how many are making much about President Trump's calling Omarosa a dog over Twitter yesterday, and I just kind of went through a long list, everyone from Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson of Twilight fame to Glenn Beck to all sorts of individuals that President Trump, David Gregory, Mitt Romney, Steve Bannon, that he was calling dogs. And you know that just because he's done it a lot doesn't mean that it's necessarily right, but it does make a difference between some of the substance and policy as well. And I'll go ahead and lay my cards out on the table for both of you all, so you can agree with me or disagree with me, Michael and Chelsey. I'm not a big fan of President Trump utilizing his platform to call people dogs. I'm not a big fan of him utilizing his platform to call MS-13, as heinous as they are, animals. I just think that there's especially from the Christian standpoint, there's a humanizing element that we need to recognize humans for humans, and we don't need to we need to be very cautious with our tongues. I think James 3 would say, and then Ephesians 4, to want to be kind and to watch our mouths for lack of better terms. And so I'm going to take that mind that I'm not a big fan of his rhetoric. I know that there are some that are saying that this is just strong talk and it's nice to have this type of talk. And they're using the idea of political correctness and tired of having political correctness. I don't think this is politically, I don't care less about political correctness. I think that's a misunderstanding of political correctness more and just a lack of tact too. But I will celebrate some of the substance, but I'm not a fan of this rhetoric. Michael, what would you add to this? Let me just throw you into the grenade, throw you into the minefield, and tell me what you think about this.
You know, I've probably identify with you. I mean, my take on President Trump and specifically the coverage that he's received is kind of in this fake news culture that we have, where depending on what your news source is, really shapes your worldview. Which, shout out why it's so important to listen to great programs like Point of View. It makes it difficult to have conversations sort of in the middle. So if you hate President Trump because of his rhetoric and the language choice that he uses, and it is wrong. I mean, we are created in the image of God. We are image bearers of God, and so even people you disagree with, even people that do atrocious things, are still human and are not outside the reach of God's grace, and so they deserve to be treated with the dignity, value, and respect that as a fellow image bearer of God. While on the other hand, if you look at the substance, to use your terms, the substance of what he's trying to communicate, just to your point, it's not that in this case that he was using terms or words that extend beyond what he would call even some people that are, Republican-leaning individuals or whatever. It's just part of his faulty, sinful rhetoric. And so it's sort of like talking over each other, where on the one hand, if you want to just say, look at what he calls people, we shouldn't take him seriously at all, you have your ammunition. And if you want to say, well, he calls other people by these same terms and he uses the same type of language, and you shouldn't be taken seriously because you're not taking him seriously. You're not giving him a fair shake. That both sides can just kind of lob grenades over the wall towards each other, and they don't actually have to meet in the middle and have a conversation. So I do wish that he would tone down his rhetoric and begin to have substantive conversations. I understand that some people, as you mentioned, like that kind of talk because they feel like they haven't had someone to kind of stand for them. But I would caution us that I fear that in the long term that it's doing a lot more damage than we can recognize right now, as the kind of just temperature of the debate continues to rise and escalate. And I don't know how it begins to turn down so that we're not at this boiling point, because we can't sustain it.
I completely agree with that. This is an unsustainable level that we're living at right now. We'd love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, as well as Facebook.com/Point of View Radio. Leave a question or comment there. And Chelsey, one of the things that I just think is, it just seems crazy. I don't want to say crazy. Crazy is the wrong word. It just seems very unfortunate. And I think it's just, I wish that we could have an opportunity, like, not to be all or nothing with him. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, right? I should be able to I can still be supportive of my president. I can still be a fan of him. But yet, if I can't say anything negative about him, that just seems like a very small-minded view of support of him, right? Like, we've always been able to voice disagreement with people on our side. But it seems as though right now that there's so much, I don't know if it's insecurity, I don't know what it is right now, that where you can't even say something negative about our president without individuals just kind of going over it. Like, it just makes no sense to me.
Well, I think what we're all making the argument for is just to have an intellectually honest discussion, whether it's about being honest about the rhetoric and the standards for that, and honest about the substance. And I think we owe it to our president and to history and to having an accurate and truthful depiction of what's going on in the world to be honest about both. But I will argue not that he doesn't receive a lambasting enough from people. Yeah. I think he is constantly lambasted. He's criticized in the news. I can't turn on anything or read nearly any article without there being at the very least undertones of criticism of our president. And so I think people are tired of it. They're weary of it. They're weary of that narrative.
So here's where I'll okay.
But, okay, you're going to like this but, so just wait for it. But I think that we can't do ourselves a disservice by saying we've heard it from so many other people. We're so sick of it that we're just going to cover over really flagrant issues that arise. And so I think to be intellectually honest means to say, when it comes to the rhetoric, we can point at that and say it's at the very least not presidential, if not wrong. Okay. He's not our pastor. So it is not, I don't necessarily agree with you guys that we have to hold him to we should hold everyone to a biblical standard, but he's not really. We don't know about him being a Christian. We don't know where he stands.
He's a Christian, though.
Yeah, that's true. I just don't expect that of my politicians.
Okay.
I wish I had a higher expectation for them, but I'm not expecting that out of Trump. We can all say that the rhetoric it's a problem, and it's a problem for, I think, really the degradation of politics and diplomacy in our society. But when it comes to the substance, he has delivered. Time and time again, he's delivered.
Okay, so here's one of the things. It's like an expectation game, right? So when I go to a Beyonce concert, I don't expect to hear Chris Tomlin music. And not that I would go to.
That's a really great example.
Not that I would go to a Beyonce concert, but I expect to hear Chris Tomlin when I go to Chris Tomlin. I expect to hear Beyonce when I go to Beyonce. With that, when I go to CNN, I expect a couple of things. One, it's always breaking news. I think we're all broken from all the breaking news that happens. Regardless of whatever's happening, there's just a ton of breaking news always on CNN. Even if it's not breaking, it's just, I think that's just how desensitized we are now that they have to put breaking news on everything now. Everything is going crazy. And then two, I can always expect on CNN there to be a negative bent towards President Trump. There's a sensationalization of something that he said or something that's been enacted. Whatever it is, I just know that it's going to be. So I expect that. Similarly, when I expect to read when I go to Fox News and when I go to a conservative bent, like I have certain expectations.
Right.
And I would hope that those instances or those outlets that I'm going are going to be intellectually honest with that too. So the tariffs would be a perfect example. For as long as I can remember, tariffs have always been one of those things that have been they've been a bad word. They've been a cuss word for conservatives. But it's just been so fascinating to read certain individuals right now that are advocating and speaking of the glory of tariffs right now, simply because President Trump has advocated for tariffs. Or they've been a very strong moral voice, but then to wash away, let's just keep it moral, for example, to wash away the fact that he's calling individuals dogs, that he's using this derogatory language. I just expect more of those individuals to be able to call balls and strikes. Call it fairly.
I agree with that. Yeah,
I agree fairly. And that's where the expectation goes in. Michael, what would you add?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you just said. The expectation piece is huge. And I would love to discuss a little bit what Chelsey brought up, because I think it was a great point. I think this is a big discussion within the church, is sort of what should our expectations be of our president. And I do not personally have any problem voting for Donald Trump or a Mitt Romney who is either not professing to, share my exact same faith, or is professing it, but their lifestyle and, kind of actions would at least display some questions that you'd have about them. So I don't need to vote for my pastor. However, as a Christian, I do think that it's important, to your point, to be voicing the right problems that we have, and that particularly evangelicals have been so tightly tethered to Donald Trump that it does compromise, I think, our long-term witness. In particular, what we talked about last hour, in a day when the church, through many denominations, have been in trouble for sexual abuse, to tie ourselves to a man who has had morality issues, I think can be problematic, and we need to be clear that we don't tolerate or stand with that.
Completely. And we've got to take a break, but we'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as Michael McAfee of the Museum of the Bible. And we kind of veered into a minefield, one might be able to say, of President Trump's rhetoric, specifically his utilization, or I guess you could say overutilization, of calling people dogs. Many in the media are making much of his idea, much of his comment of likening Omarosa and some of her recent overtures towards taping President Trump and taping Chief of Staff John Kelly in the Situation Room, and now has gone ahead and is going to be releasing a book, and then President Trump yesterday tweeted that she's a dog. Many were making more of that comment, and it's maybe saying that there's racial overtones towards it, that there's derogatory, degrading, would be the better word, derogatory tones towards being a female. But at the end of the day, President Trump, as we look through history, has just called a lot of people dogs. Eric Erickson to Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart, he's likened to a dog. I mean, we can go David Gregory, Mitt Romney, Glenn Beck, Ariana Huffington, Bill Maher, and so that's one of the things that he uses, and we really have been trying to make a distinction between President Trump's rhetoric as well as President Trump's substance and some of the actions that he's done. And then Michael and Chelsey both brought up a great point, as you would expect, and not me bringing up the great point of the idea of expectations-wise, of what do you expect from President Trump. And so we're going to open up the phone lines. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we're going to jump over to Arizona right now. We've got Janice on the line. Janice, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Janice, what's your point of view?
My point of view is, well, instead of calling the people dogs, let's kind of hone it down to what they really are. MS-13 is a vicious group of people assaulting our peaceful way of life, our communities, and destroying people in the process. He could maybe apologize for calling people dogs, because that really does throw a shadow on a very noble creature. We have our service dogs, our help dogs, companion dogs, and dogs in general. So when he says call somebody a dog, some dog people are kind of offended. But but calling someone a malicious person, hone it down more to what the person actually is and what they're doing, rather than trying to call someone a donkey or a dog or something.
Yeah. Go ahead, Janice.
And I think prayer does a lot of things. I've traveled the whole world, and everywhere I went, people would open right up when I would ask, Lord, what do I do in this situation? So, calling people dogs, it's derogatory to the poor dog.
Yeah, Janice, you bring up a great point about prayer too. I mean, it's a reminder from, I think it's Luke 12:12, and I will teach you what you ought to say in time of need, and how the Holy Spirit of God is able to utilize and speak through our mouths in order to help us to be able to give just the right gracious word that we might be able to need. And I just am, I am troubled by the president's rhetoric. I'm very encouraged by the substance of some of the stuff his administration's put out there, but just the president's rhetoric, there's just a large part of me that wishes he would kind of pull back from that. But nevertheless, we're going to continue taking some of your phone calls. We're going to jump down to Georgia right now. We've got Maddie in Georgia. Maddie, you there?
Yes. Hello there. How are you?
I can't complain. It wouldn't do me any good if I did anyway. So, Maddie, what's your point of view?
Okay, my point is I'm so thankful. I listen to this program almost always, especially on Wednesdays, because I'm traveling from doing ministry in women's prison. And I'm so busy trying to teach them the word to get them equipped for when they come out. But I was glad to hear today that the host and the guests there were able to say that there's a problem with this, quote, rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
So you all made me happy to hear that, because sometimes I've been concerned, because I speak to you as a Christian, and I know you are too, that sometimes we want to try to stay and support, and it undercuts what we really know as Christians we're supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. And I believe that this is happening a lot. This is not judgmental. I think about what President Trump's rhetoric does not help anything, because his rhetoric has extended so far, so wide, that I believe it does more damage and causes more schism throughout the world. I just wish that he would stop it totally. I don't know if he's able to, because it gets down to basic behavior that we should have learned when we were children. I remember as a child growing up in the country, if somebody called you a dog as an African American or black, that was the worst thing they could call you. Because there's something in the Bible about dogs. Supposed to be one of the lowest animals, okay? But I just think it's awful that he's taking it lower and lower, and that even the people, our lawmakers, I don't care if they're in the blue or red states, it doesn't matter to me, that they are still supporting this. And it's out of the hunger to get that little support from him so they can win. I think that when I think of President Trump right now, I'm going to be honest, I've tried to reconcile this. I think of the Pharaoh. When Moses kept going to him, we see one thing after another, and it keeps getting worse, but he's not listening. I wish somebody would take him to Matthew, where Jesus was present with the woman who was caught in adultery. He got rid of the accusers. We did that. When the first tape came out, he was forgiven pretty much for that, okay, that he called fake news, but it was his voice. But when Jesus dismissed the woman, it was with love and it was with a correction. Go and sin no more. I just wish our president would understand that, okay, this is past. You don't have to do this. Let's make everything good right now. I'm embarrassed to have him as my president now because I believe in this country. I believe in the principles. I believe in everything that was our founding fathers brought to it. It was not all perfect, but it was so beautiful. The love, the quality of life that they wanted. But it's coming apart now because I look at the ones who are following his lead as ahead. We have so much problems now with the police and all of this and others in leadership. He's not setting an example.
Yeah, I think that Maddie, thank you so much for your comment. Like, it's just another reminder of what the proverb says, right? In Proverbs 14, righteousness exalts a nation, sin degrades one. It's just increasingly important for us I would just come in to be able to celebrate where we can celebrate and to rejoice where we can rejoice, but also to just to call out where we need to call out. And again, it's not indicative of my support. I think about Nathan, prime example, right? Like Michael, I think about the harsh word that Nathan must have had to deliver and what must have been going through Nathan, where he literally had to go to David and say, David, you've done so much, but this is wrong, what you've done. And the courage that it took Nathan to be able to deliver that harsh word to a leader that had to go through that literally was causing the nation to prosper, but also had privately done some heinous acts, and that harsh word that had to be delivered. But at the end of the day, it had to be delivered, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, there's this isn't to say that the president never has to say things that are difficult to hear or use language that's strong. I think it's a question of what's an appropriate type of strong language. And my perspective is that because I think that Christians can probably rightly point to a lot of examples where the rhetoric against Christians and against Christianity has increased and has become more and more offensive. And so the response has been that there's a leader now in the White House who's very favorable towards Christians and Christianity and things that we care about and is willing to say hard things. And so we want to back him because he can say sort of things that we can't. Where I think that, kind of to go back to your words, the substance of what he's implementing, much of it is friendly to Christianity and the Christian faith and Christian values and principles, right? And so those, like you said, should be celebrated, while at the same time the rhetoric of hate and divisiveness has to be, that we should be calling for that to be stopped. In the same way that a president that was, working against people of faith and consciousness and people of conscience, we should call for him not to be divisive, him or her. And so I think that's my bigger problem. Is I'm reminded of the Martin Luther King quote that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. That I want to see there be a level of charity and a willingness to have conversation and to not use offensive language needlessly.
Completely agree. Completely agree. And we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking about some of the rhetoric from President Trump right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. High school graduation is filled with pomp and circumstance. It's supposed to be a joyous day as years of study culminate with caps and gowns, hearing everyone's middle names, and mothers weeping with joy. That's the kind of day Sam Blackledge expected. With a perfect 4.0 GPA, Sam earned the position of co-valedictorian of his senior class at West Prairie High School. But as graduates assembled in the small gymnasium surrounded by small farms in rural northwest Illinois, school officials determined that Sam could not give his speech. Why? Because Sam's speech mentioned God. Minutes before the ceremony began, Sam was crushed with the news. The last lesson this school district taught its students is that they should hide their religious beliefs from public view. Sam's only high school graduation was ruined. One wonders how many more graduations must be ruined before school officials learn that the First Amendment protects student remarks at graduation. Sadly, there was a simple solution. As Judge Easterbrook explained, writing in Hedges v. Wakanda Community School District, the school's proper response is to educate the audience rather than squelch the speaker. And if schools can't teach that basic lesson, Judge Easterbrook observes, one wonders whether the schools can teach anything at all. First Liberty represents Sam, hoping to protect future students who wish to reference their religious beliefs while on campus. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined over the phone by Michael McAfee, and also we've got in studio right now Chelsey Youman, and we have been talking about President Trump's rhetoric largely, his calling individuals dogs, specifically as of late, Omarosa, the former White House aide, and now she is going to be largely due to her potentially publishing a book here coming out pretty soon that some said that she has recorded tapes inside the White House. And we've been talking about from a Christian perspective, is this something that's beneficial? Is this something that's good? Should we support? Does our support for our president mean that we can't acknowledge bad behavior, or maybe bad rhetoric when we see it? And we're actually going to take a call right now that has a pretty interesting point of view. We've got Audrey right now from North Carolina. Audrey, are you there?
Yes. Okay. In Matthew's gospel, it talks about Jesus calling the Pharisees and Sadducees snakes and vipers, and telling them that they're in very danger of hell. So what's the difference in being called a snake or a viper and a dog?
Yeah, I would say that those are two pretty different things right now. So you've got Jesus that's calling someone that's calling the Pharisees snakes and vipers in ancient Near Eastern context. It's pretty different from President in 2018 calling someone a dog. So I think the time difference is something. And then also I'm going to, I probably am going to say that Jesus had something more specific in mind, just because he, being divine as he was, he probably was able to utilize that in a way that was much more characteristic and much more equating to that situation. Whereas our president, I don't know if he necessarily is tapping into the same mentality that our Lord would tap into. Does that make sense, Audrey?
Well, he was doing it from a spiritual point of view. So, I mean, to be called a snake or a viper, some people that love snakes would take that as an offensive as being called a dog. So it was just a question, you know.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, I felt like it was very interesting that Jesus would call these people just the very lowest, you know.
Yeah.
The people that were religiously in the higher echelons, you know.
Mm-hmm. Michael, what would you add anything to that? I think there is a go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would. I think it's a great question because he also, he talks about sheep and the goats, right? Like there's other talk that our Lord Jesus himself compares people to animals, but in that he's making theological points to fellow religious people of his day. Calling someone a snake or a viper, the Pharisees, they instantly would connect the dots that he's talking to them about the serpent in the garden himself, and he's saying to them, you're lost. And so I think the point that you made, Nick, was perfect, that contextually it's very different from our president today who is claiming to be a Christian to call people that he disagrees with or that are giving him trouble animals and dehumanizing them. We should stand against it in the same way that this was a strategy of Nazi Germany, to dehumanize the Jewish people. And so I don't think that President Trump's trying to make a theological point, and I think we can, even if we agree with some of the things that he disagrees with, we should, Ephesians 4 talks to us about let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth, but only such as is good for building up. So I think it's important. I think there's a difference between what Jesus was doing and what Trump is doing today.
Yeah. Here's I think one of the fascinating things, and Audrey, thank you so much for your phone call, is one of the things that I just want to end on, like a really kind of a beautiful point of just the power of the gospel. So there were quite a few of my friends that were very critical of me because I was a little critical of the president when he called MS-13 animals. And he was just lashing out. Now, what they did was just pure and heinous evil. So for those of you that aren't familiar, MS-13 is a gang that's primarily located, you've got in Central America as well as in, Central America as well as in Mexico, that are just some heinous evil things that they're doing. They're torturing children. They are kidnapping individuals. It's heinous and evil things. Well, one of the beautiful things that happened, though, is that The Guardian, which is a publication based out of the UK, but also did some investigatory work. And what they did is they documented, there's this 10-minute documentary on the Guardian's website that talks about how there was one individual from the MS-13 gang that left the gang because he got called by Jesus. And because he got called by Jesus, Jesus called him back, much like he often does, calls people back into the places where they had influence. And now there's over 1,000 former MS-13 gang members, animals that have been saved because of the ministry of this former MS-13 gang leader. And they've gotten to the point where they've got a missionary house that's down there, and it's provided like a halfway house and a transition house for individuals that join the gang because, one, the corruption of their hearts, two, the desires to be connected with individuals. But one of the beautiful things about what God did is he called an individual out of that. He was obedient and heard the voice of God, dropped everything, denied himself, followed after Jesus, and now he started a ministry to help other individuals out of that. So even the most heinous people are still people that Jesus died for. And that's why I'm always so hesitant to utilize that dehumanizing language of animals in a derogatory fashion, not a Randy Jackson from American Idol yo dog fashion,
Not to be confused, as I was earlier.
Not to be confused, but just to be able to see, like, Jesus, like the blood of Christ, those that were far away, it says in Ephesians 2, have been brought near by the blood of Christ. So even this dehumanizing language is kind of indirectly indicates that they're so far gone and they're so evil that they cannot be redeemed. And what we saw even within this MS-13 is there's no place that's too far that God's love does not reach. And that's why I'm so hesitant to be able to utilize that language. And Michael, that's why I'm so glad that you all in D.C. as well as in Oklahoma City are continuing to put the God of the Bible before people in order that they might be able to know, to taste, and to see, and to grow a greater appreciation and love for who God is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we just simply want to bring the Bible back into public conversation. And so I'm so glad that you are doing that here on this radio show, and would encourage your listeners, right, to throughout their conversation, whether it be touching politics, religion, whatever kind of area that they're in, to consider what does the Bible say about this area of life, and how do I allow that to become the framework through which I understand all of the world around me, rather than what I'm being fed through other outlets.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's this idea, like the Bible from Psalm 119 is a light to our path and a guide for our feet. And reminded of the Abraham Kuyper quote of, "There's not one square inch over God's whole humane of existence over which God does not say mine," that he's claiming and redeeming it all for the glory of his name, for the joy of our soul, and for the good of this world. And so, Chelsey, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. It's always fun.
So for individuals and listeners that are looking to find out more information on First Liberty and some of the First Amendment issues, religious liberty issues that you're working on, where can they find more information?
Sure. So I'm actually attorney on staff with First Liberty Institute, and we are the largest nonprofit in the country dedicated exclusively to defending and restoring our First Amendment religious liberty rights. And so I represent everyone from clients to churches to organizations, anyone who has had their constitutional rights deprived. And I'm really proud of that calling in my life and really proud to serve in that way. So if you want to hear more about what we do, or you have a potential issue that you'd like us to vet for you, please go to firstliberty.org and read more about our cases.
That's great. Michael, 15 seconds. Where can we find out more information on the Museum of the Bible?
Yep, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Museum of Bible, or go to our website, museumofthebible.org, and please come visit us whenever you're in Washington. Membership is affordable for people of all backgrounds, and we'd love to have you there.
I love it. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Chelsey, as always, thank you for putting up with me, and for our listening audience, thank you so much. Be sure to tune in tomorrow, and we will see you then.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.